I want to talk with you today about the experience of anxiety. And it's probably something that you've experienced because most of us can have that at one time or another. Now, like any other emotion, anxiety is going to be experienced on a spectrum. Sometimes it's just a situational kind of thing where it shows up here and there when you have an unwanted or an undesirable situation in front of you. Other times, the anxiety can be pervasive to the extent that it takes over your personality. And then, of course, there can be some experiences of the emotion in that interim kind of place, if you will. Before we get to the three primary ingredients at the foundation of anxiety, I want to see if we can kind of get a baseline of some of the indicators that you are indeed in an anxious place. For example, some of the indicators of anxiety would include feeling edgy or irritable, having an inability to relax, feeling restless. Sometimes the anxious person has a need to tie down loose ends and they're having a hard time being able to do it. There can be ruminating thoughts to the extent that it's obsessive in nature. Many times the anxious person is going to feel very self-conscious. How am I coming across? Did I do that right? How are other people going to perceive me? There can be a sense of panic at times that you feel with your anxiety. Anxious people tend to awfulize circumstances. Now that's not a technical word in the psychology dictionaries, but when we talk about awfulizing, you take a potential negative and you make it much, much bigger than it really needs to be. Anxious people have an insecurity. How am I coming across? Are people going to get mad at me? What am I supposed to do if this person responds in a way that I don't want? As a result, sometimes anxiety can lead to indecisiveness, and there can be broken sleep patterns that you can have. And so you can see that anxiety has many different manifestations. So I want you to think, is this something that I ever deal with? And by the way, if the anxiety becomes so pervasive that it really does take over, it may be that you'll need to speak with somebody in the medical profession about a medical approach towards this, because that actually can be a real benefit. Not everybody needs something like that, but keep an open mind regarding those things. Now, I mentioned that there are three primary ingredients at the foundation of anxiety, and those ingredients are fear, anger, and control. Now, let's see if we can break those down. Now, when we talk about fear that's a part of anxiety, we're talking about a sense of apprehension and dread and insecurity. The fearful person is looking out there, scanning the environment out there, wondering, how am I coming across to people? Are you going to judge me? Am I going to make mistakes? Are people going to be disappointed in me? And there's this sense that says, I'm not real sure what I'm going to do if things fall apart or if people disapprove of me. And so as a result of that, you'll notice that in your fear that goes along with anxiety, there's a constant need to justify yourself, to rationalize and say, well, here's why I do the things that I do, and to try to somehow or another explain that you really are an okay person. And that's part of that awfulizing. You can exaggerate your need to have other people's approval to the extent that there's a constant sense of defensiveness. And so keep in mind that defensiveness is probably one of the easiest ways that we can tell that a person is in their fear mode, because it's their way of saying, I can't just let the regular me stand out there. I'm constantly having to let folks know that I'm not nearly as bad as they think I am. And so it implies that sense of dread that's on the inside. Now, when we talk about the anger, let's keep in mind, when you have your mood of anxiety, there's always an irritability that's attached to it. Now, you may not yell and scream and slam doors, although sometimes you may be taken to that kind of extreme, but the anxious person is going to have an undertow of agitation or irritability, frustration, annoyance, impatience. A lot of people don't see that as a part of their anger, but that's part of the anger, just in a less severe kind of way. Now, the anger is tapped into the sense of self-preservation. I need to stand up for who I am. But the anxious person is preserving oneself in a pretty poor way. They're doing so in such a way where they push people away because of their moodiness, and they're not certainly going to stand up in a way that people say, hey, I really like what you're trying to tell me. And so they actually create more problems than they solve when they go into that agitated and annoyed kind of place. And then when we talk about that third ingredient, control, it can actually go two ways. Many times, the anxious person feels like other people out there wish to control them. It's like other folks have an agenda, they have a lot of must and have to and should, and the anxious person is thinking, I hate it when people talk to me that way, but I guess I've got to do whatever is necessary to keep them off my back. Sometimes the anxious person is the one who wishes to be in control. They have such a need to keep everything lined up and in its place that they overplay their sense of responsibility and duty and obligation to the extent that they have an imposing mannerism, so they can feel controlled or they can wish to be in control, and in doing so they forget there's a whole lot of things out there that you can't control, and the anxious person is thinking, but I've got to make sure it all happens correctly. So knowing that the anxiety is manifested in many different ways, and there are these three ingredients, I want to see if we can take a look at perhaps some ways that you can respond to this so that the anxiety is not nearly as prominent. And the first thing that we want to focus on is make sure that you put your attention to the interior of your life rather than the exterior. Now, the anxious person is constantly thinking, what's going on out there? What do people think? How can I get my life to line up exactly the way that I say it needs to be? And that's not entirely wrong. I mean, there's a certain organization to life, and there's a certain conscientiousness, obviously, that we want to maintain. But many people focus on the exterior to the extent that they almost completely overlook their interior. And so let's make sure that we're saying, I can't necessarily do everything to make my outer life be exactly what I want it to be, but I want to make sure that my inner life is where it needs to be. Now, that having been said, I want to look at a second point, and that is, take a look at what your character is. Are you a decent person? Do you have a good sense of morality or good values that you operate with? And if you don't, you probably are going to be a pretty anxious kind of person because people are going to respond poorly to that. But as you examine yourself and you realize, you know, as a general rule, I do try to approach life with a certain responsibility, and I try to have good character, and I want to be open to other people's input, then that becomes a remedy for some of this anxiety. You don't have to approach life with such fear. Even if you make mistakes, it's like, okay, I make mistakes, but still I know that the interior of me is going to be anchored in a sense of well-being. And you can learn how to practice what I just referred to as self-trust. When you learn to trust in yourself, not that you're perfect and not that you do everything ideally, but when you learn to trust that as a general rule, you're in a growth mode, you want to be open to new experience and input, then that becomes part of what's going to go into your sense of calmness and peace. And so you want to learn how to have that good character in such a way where you can trust yourself. And if someone comes along and says, but I don't trust you, well, but you trust yourself, and that exterior doesn't have to override your interior. A third thing that we want to make sure that we focus on, and this kind of addresses that anger issue, and that is make sure that you're standing firmly for your convictions and needs in a proper kind of way. Many times when I work with people with anxiety, we can look back for years usually and find that there are all sorts of times when they probably should have stood up for themselves and should have established boundaries and didn't. And then in doing so, it sets themselves up to have this tense emotional reaction. So in order to combat your anxiety, you want to have an ongoing pattern that says, I'm standing up for my convictions. I'm going to let people know who I am. And if somebody wants to question me, I'm always open to input. But at the end of the day, I'm going to hold firm with what I believe is wisest and best. And then fourth, let's go with the notion that says, there's just a lot of things in life that I can't control. Therefore, I'm not going to try to control so much. Now, interestingly, the less you try to control, the more in control you are. People out there and circumstances out there are just going to be what they are with or without your input. And a lot of times folks just don't care what you think. And if you're in that high control mode, then you're setting yourself up for a lot of strain. And so let's acknowledge that this is an imperfect world, or this is a world where people just think differently, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that. And so stay in your home, in your own lane. Stay close to your home base, realizing I'll do the best that I can in my life. If someone feels the need to control me, that's their problem. I don't feel the need to comply with a controlling person, nor do I feel the need to control anything and everything that's in front of me. And so as you come to terms with that, then hopefully the anxiety is going to lessen. So as you identify these three primary ingredients of anxiety, I'm hoping that you're going to recognize, even if the externals out there don't line up precisely the way I want, my internals are going to be of a sort that says, I can do life. I can do it well. And when things don't exactly go according to the preferences that I have, I'll figure it out. That's what I do. Now, I hope that you find value in videos such as this. Beneath the video, you'll see that there's a subscribe button. If you've not already done so, I'd like for you to subscribe so that we can apprise you when more videos pop up. Just know that I truly appreciate being along the way in your journey. It really is an honor for me when you allow me to speak into these issues with you and for you. And then let's keep in mind my motto that I have here. Dr. C, DRC, stands for dignity, respect, civility. That's what we're aiming for here. And so as we learn how to clean up our lives, then those three ingredients can become a part of what's foundational to us. So, and also beneath the video, I do want you to be aware that I have some books and some online workshops, and then also some resources regarding online counseling and things of that nature. So avail yourself to that. That having been said, I'll see you next time.